The first blow wasn't a punch. It was the sound of her textbooks hitting the scuffed linoleum floor. A sharp, echoing crack that silenced the usual chaos of the senior hallway. For a heartbeat, all you could hear was the distant slam of a locker and the frantic beat of a pop song from someone's phone. Then a voice, slick with arrogance, cut through the air. Oops. Clumsy new girl. This wasn't an accident. This was a declaration of war in a world she was just trying to survive. Kuhei everyone, if you're new here, stories like this are what we live for. The underdog, the hidden strength, the moment everything turns. If you want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our community. You won't want to miss what happens next. Her name was Alara. She was the new silhouette against a backdrop of faded blue lockers, the unfamiliar face in a sea of established hierarchies. She'd arrived at Northwood High with the quiet hope of invisibility, a concept as foreign to this place as snow in the desert. She wore a simple green t-shirt and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her eyes, a calm and observant shade of hazel, took in everything but gave nothing away. To the predators of the social jungle, she looked like prey soft, quiet, an easy target for lions who ruled the hallways. The lions today were Jake and Cole. Jake, the larger of the two, wore a blue and yellow varsity jacket, the wool sleeves stretched tight over his shoulders, the letter N stitched with a pride that had long since curdled into entitlement. He was the kind of handsome that came from never having been told no, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. Cole was his shadow, a wary, smirking echo, his laughter always a half beat behind Jake's, his cruelty a learned performance to maintain his proximity to power. They had been circling Elara since her first day a week ago. A whispered comment about her thrift store jeans, a casual bump into her in the cafeteria that sent her tray clattering. The usual tactics. Elara had absorbed it all with a quiet patience that they mistook for weakness. She never reacted, never fired back a retort, never even met their gaze for more than a second. This, more than anything, seemed to infuriate Jake. His dominance relied on a reaction. Fear, anger, submission. Her serene silence was a language he didn't understand, a fortress wall he was determined to breach. The scattered books on the floor were his latest attempt. He'd accidentally shouldered her as he passed, sending her armful of world history and calculus skidding across the floor. A circle was already forming, a semi-circle of cell phones and wide-eyed students drawn to the spectacle like moths to a flame. This was the theater of high school, and a public takedown was the main event. "Looks like you dropped something," Jake said, his voice a low, mocking drawl. He planted a foot on her open calculus textbook, the cover creasing under his sneaker. "You should really be more careful." The Cole snickered, his arms crossed, leaning against the lockers as if watching a particularly entertaining show. "Maybe she needs help picking them up, since she's new and all." Elara didn't look at her books. She looked at Jake. Her expression was unchanged, a placid lake on a windless day. But deep in her eyes, something shifted. A subtle tightening, a focus that hadn't been there before. It was the look of a safecracker hearing the final tumbler fall into place. The assessment was over. "I'm going to need you to move your foot," she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying an unnerving steadiness in the tense hallway. Jake's smirk widened. This was the reaction he wanted. A challenge. Or what? "New girl. You gonna cry? Go get a teacher." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for her, but the silent, watching crowd caught every syllable. "This is my school. You breathe here because I allow it." A girl in the front of the crowd, her phone held vertically, recording everything, gasped softly. This was escalating. This was getting good. Elara's gaze flickered from Jake's face to his stance. He was leaning heavily on his front foot, the one on her book. His weight was distributed poorly, his center of gravity high and forward. He was strong, undoubtedly, but he relied on his size and reputation, not technique. He was a brawler. She was something else entirely. "Last chance," Elara said, her tone still eerily calm. "Step back." Jake laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He looked around at his audience, basking in their anticipation. "You hear that? She's giving me a last chance." He turned back to her, all pretense of amusement gone from his face. "Pick up your books and get to class. And watch your mouth." He reached out, not to hit her, but to shove her shoulder. A classic dominance move, to physically displace her, to show everyone who was in charge. It was the last mistake he would ever make in that hallway. The moment his hand touched her shoulder, Elara moved. It wasn't a dodge or a flinch. It was a fluid, economic explosion of motion so fast the kid's recording almost missed it. Her left hand came up, not in a fist, but in an open-handed block, deflecting his pushing arm inward, past her body. At the same time, her right foot hooked behind the ankle of the leg he was standing on. It wasn't a kick, it was a precise, sweeping motion. It was over in less than a second. Jake's arrogant shove met no resistance where he expected it, and his own forward momentum, combined with the sweep to his standing leg, sent him crashing to the floor. He landed on his back with a heavy, breath-stealing thud, the sound shockingly loud in the stunned silence. The impact reverberated through the linoleum. He lay there, dazed, the wind knocked out of him, his varsity jacket splayed out like a broken pair of wings. The collective gasp from the circle of students was a physical thing. Phones were held tighter. Eyes widened. Cole's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of pure, uncomprehending shock. Elara hadn't even assumed a fighting stance. She stood exactly where she was, now looking down at Jake, her expression one of mild annoyance, as if she'd just had to swat a particularly persistent fly. She then turned her gaze to Cole. Cole, recovering from his stupor, let out a strangled yell of anger. "You bitch!" He charged, all rage and no thought, swinging a wild, telegraphed haymaker aimed at her head. This time, Elara didn't just redirect. She met force with devastating precision. She dropped her weight slightly, pivoted on the ball of her foot, and the wild punch whistled harmlessly past her ear. As Cole's body followed his swing, exposed and off balance, she drove her elbow hard into his ribs. There was a sickening, muffled crack. He grunted, his eyes bulging in pain and shock, stumbling forward. Before he could even register the agony, Elara's legs swept up in a blistering high kick, her sneaker stopping a hair's breadth from his nose. The air displaced by the kick ruffled his hair. She held the kick there, her leg perfectly extended, her balance absolute. Cole froze, his body hunched over, clutching his ribs, staring cross-eyed at the sole of her shoe. A single, sharp push was all it would take to break his nose, to send him to the hospital. The hallway was a tomb. You could have heard a pin drop. The only movement was the shaky recording from a dozen cell phones. Slowly, deliberately, Elara lowered her leg. She didn't say a word to Cole. She simply turned bent down and began calmly collecting her books from the floor, carefully brushing off the footprint Jake had left on her calculus text. She stacked them neatly in her arms. Jake was groaning, trying to push himself up onto his elbows. He looked up at her, his face a mask of pain, humiliation, and a dawning, terrifying understanding. Elara stood up, her books held securely. She looked at the circle of stunned students, her eyes passing over the recording phones without a flicker of concern. Then she looked back down at Jake, her voice still quiet, but now it carried the weight of absolute authority. "My name is Elara," she said, "and you will not touch me again." With that, she turned and walked down the hallway. The sea of students parted for her without a sound, creating a path as she moved through them. She didn't look back. The click of the classroom door closing behind her was the period at the end of the sentence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, the whispers started, a rising tide of disbelief and excitement. The videos were already being uploaded, texted, shared. The legend of the new girl had begun not with a whimper, but with an earthquake. But the story, the real story, wasn't in that hallway. It was in the years that led to it. It was in a small, sunlit dojo 1,000 miles away, where a 9-year-old girl small for her age had stood trembling before a much larger boy. Again, Elara, a calm, firm voice instructed. Her sensei, a man named Kato with eyes that saw everything, watched as the boy charged. Elara, terrified, tried to run. He caught her easily, pinning her to the tatami mats. "Why do you run?" Kato had asked, not unkindly, helping her up. "You are not a rabbit. You are a fox. You do not match his strength. You use his strength against him. He see the opening he cannot." He spent the next hour teaching her not a punch, but a pivot. Not a block, but a redirection. It was the first day she learned that the strongest part of her wasn't her body, but her mind. The memories came in a flood for Elara as she sat in her next class, the hum of the fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the adrenaline still singing in her veins. She remembered the endless repetitions of kata, the forms becoming as natural as breathing. She remembered the first time she successfully executed a sweep on a training partner, the feeling of controlled power, of physics as an ally. Kato's voice was a constant in her mind. The goal is not to fight. The goal is to end the fight. The greatest victory is the one you achieve without throwing a single technique. But if you must be the last one standing. She had never wanted to use it. Her family's move to this town was supposed to be a fresh start, away from the pressures of the competitive martial arts circuit her father had been so obsessed with. It was supposed to be normal. But normal, it seemed, had its own set of predators. The fallout from the hallway was immediate and viral. By lunchtime, the video, titled was on every social media feed in the school. The comments were a wildfire. Some hailed her as a hero. Others, friends of Jake and Cole, called her a psycho, a freak. The school administration was thrown into chaos. Elara was pulled out of her fourth period class and escorted to the principal's office. Principal Higgins was a balding man with a perpetually worried expression, a man who valued order above all else. Sitting across from him were Jake, Cole, and Cole's furious mother. Jake was holding an ice pack to the back of his head, playing up his injury. Cole was slumped in his chair, his arm wrapped around his midsection. A doctor's note already on the principal's desk citing bruised ribs. Ms. Vance. Principal Higgins began, steepling his fingers. The video we've all seen shows a disturbing level of violence. We have a zero-tolerance policy for fighting. With all due respect, Principal Higgins, Elara said, her voice even. The video also shows Jake Patterson assaulting me first. He shoved me. I defended myself. Cole Miller then charged at me. I prevented him from hitting me. It was self-defense? Not a fight. Self-defense, Cole's mother scoffed, her voice shrill. She broke my son's ribs. She's a trained animal. Elara looked at the woman, then at the principal. I have been studying Shorin, Ro Karate, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since I was 9 years old, she stated calmly. If I had intended to break his ribs, they would be broken. If I had intended to injure Jake seriously, he would have a concussion. I used the minimum amount of force necessary to neutralize the threat. My instructor's first rule was always proportional response. The room went quiet. Her calm, technical explanation was more disarming than any emotional outburst could have been. She wasn't denying what she was defining it on her own terms. The suspension was inevitable, a 3-day affair for all parties involved, a cooling-off period, as Principal Higgins called it. But the public opinion war was already won. The narrative of the trained new girl who only fought back when cornered was too powerful, too satisfying. Jake and Cole returned to school as pariahs, their social currency devalued overnight. The varsity jacket that once commanded respect now seemed like a costume. They were a joke. The Kings had been dethroned. For a few weeks, there was a fragile peace. Elara remained an outsider, but now she was a respected one, a solitary figure who commanded a wide berth in the hallways. People looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. Then came the rumor, whispered in the bleachers during a Friday night football game. Jake and Cole weren't just going to take their humiliation lying down. They were connected. Jake's older brother, Marcus, was a different kind of problem. Where Jake was a schoolyard bully, Marcus was a legitimate threat. He'd done time in juvie for assault, and he ran with a rough crowd. The word was that he was furious about what happened to his little brother. This wasn't over. The trap was set off school grounds, in the parking lot of the local convenience store, where Elara sometimes bought a soda after school. It was a crisp autumn evening, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. She was walking home, her backpack slung over one shoulder, when a beat-up sedan pulled in, blocking her path. Marcus got out. He was taller, broader, and harder than Jake, with a coldness in his eyes that spoke of real violence. Two of his friends flanked him, grinning. Well, Marcus said, his voice a low gravel. You're the little bitch who put my brother in the hospital. He wasn't in the hospital. Elara replied, her body already shifting, her senses heightening. This was different. This wasn't a schoolyard squabble. This was a predator who knew how to hunt. And he brought it on himself. See, that's the thing. Marcus took a step forward, cracking his knuckles. In my world, you don't get to talk back. You show respect. He lunged at her, fast and direct, a knife appearing in his hand from nowhere. The world narrowed to the glint of the blade. The training took over, a switch flipping in her brain. This was no longer about humiliation. This was about survival. She sidestepped his initial lunge. the blade slicing through the air where her stomach had been. As his arm extended, she trapped his wrist with both of her hands, pivoting her body violently, using his own momentum to hyperextend his elbow against her shoulder. It was a classic jiu-jitsu takedown against a weapon. He cried out in surprise and pain as he was flipped onto the asphalt, the knife skittering away under a car. One of his friends rushed her. She dropped low, sweeping his legs out from under him with a spinning kick, sending him crashing into the side of the sedan. The third man hesitated, his bravado gone, seeing his two friends on the ground in less than 5 seconds. But Marcus was already scrambling up, his face a mask of pure rage. He came at her again, weaponless now, but with the ferocity of a cornered animal. He was stronger than her, and he knew how to brawl. He landed a heavy blow to her side that sent a jolt of white, hot pain through her ribs. She grunted, stumbling back. For the first time, fear, cold and sharp, pierced her focus. This was what Cato had warned her about. The street has no rules. He came in for another punch, and she saw her opening. She ducked under the swing, driving the hardened point of her knuckles into the nerve cluster on the inside of his upper arm. His entire arm went numb, hanging uselessly at his side. He stared at it, bewildered. Before he could react further, she delivered a single sharp, open-handed strike to his ear. It wasn't meant to cause lasting damage, but to disorient, to overload his senses with pain and vertigo. He staggered, clutching the side of his head, groaning. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the evening air. Someone in the convenience store had called the police. Marcus and his friends, seeing the flashing lights, scrambled into their car and screeched out of the parking lot, leaving Alara alone, breathing heavily, her side throbbing. This time, the story made the local news. High school martial arts star thwarts off-campus attack. The narrative was set in stone. Alara was no longer just the girl who fought back. She was a local hero. The police investigation, aided by security camera footage, confirmed her story entirely. Marcus was arrested. Jake and Cole, implicated in setting up the attack, were expelled. In the days that followed, something in the school shifted. The culture of fear that Jake and Cole had cultivated began to dissolve. Other students, ones who had been victims themselves, started talking to Alara. They didn't want her to teach them to fight. They just wanted to be near her quiet strength. She found herself, for the first time, with a group of friends, real friends. She started a self-defense club after school, with the principal's reluctant blessing. It wasn't about teaching violence. It was about teaching confidence. It was about teaching the rabbit that it could have the heart of a fox. The semester drew to a close. On the last day of school, Alara was at her locker, packing her bag for the summer. The hallway was buzzing with the energy of impending freedom. She felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned. It was Sarah, the girl who had been recording the first confrontation months ago. She was smiling, a genuine warm smile. "Hey," Sarah said. "A bunch of us are going to get pizza. You want to come?" Alara looked at her, at the open, friendly faces of the other kids waiting a few feet away. She thought of the long, lonely years in the dojo, the move to this town, the fear, the fight, the painful, hard-won peace. She smiled back, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes for the first time. "Yeah," Alara said, slamming her locker shut. "I'd like that." She walked out of Northwood High not as the new girl, not as the trained fighter, but simply as Alara. She had come looking for a place to hide, and instead, she had found a place to belong. The bullies had tried to knock her down, but they had only succeeded in planting her feet more firmly on the ground. The fight was over. Her life was just beginning. This story is about finding your strength. Even when the world tries to tell you that you have none, it's a reminder that sometimes the quietest people are the most dangerous, not because of what they say, but because of what they know. And to all of you who watched this journey to the very end, we have a question for you, a simple one that helps us feel connected to this amazing community we're building together. From which part of the country are you watching this video? Let us know in the comments below.